Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today. My name is Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches and your host this morning for Encounter. What does a pastor have to do in order to get ordained? They have to go to seminary, they go through a lot of training, they have to be in some denominations they have to be psychologically analyzed and written off. There's a lot of training that goes into being a pastor other than just being ordained. They have many different levels of training that they go through in order to be ordained through their denomination. One of the things that I had to do, and I found particularly rewarding within my history as an ordained minister, has been clinical pastoral education, CPE for short. Clinical pastoral education helped me understand a little bit about myself as well as the congregation that I was serving. CPE is a really interesting subject, though, isn't it? And becoming a minister is kind of there's a lot of training involved in that. What do you think of CPE?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Joe, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about clinical pastoral education with you and to run a program out of the Broome County Council of Churches this fall, and as I've done in the past a few times. Yes, I think as in any learning experience, one of the aspects of it is to learn the theory behind something, whether it be physics, anthropology, art, ministry, the work that you do. The other is practical application and having the opportunity to do some practical application while one is in a learning process. And that really is what clinical pastoral education, or CPE for short, what that's about.
So a minister would get some of the theory, which is the theology and the history of the church, right, and biblical studies and other kinds of things like that, but then they need this real hands-on practical
absolutely
application of what that means to them and to the life of their congregation, right?
Right. People call it on-the-job training, and then going back into the group environment of learning where you can reflect on what you've done. It's called an action, reflection, and then more action. So this is a constant, ongoing process. It's, I think, how human beings learn.
Right.
Anyway, you have to step back from something in order to think, but then you also go in, get involved in something, and do the work. But it's an in and out process, so to speak.
And my guest today, his name is Robert Spilman. Robert Spilman is a CPE Supervisor, which is kind of an interesting idea. Like, how do you supervise CPE? But what is a CPE Supervisor?
A CPE Supervisor is trained over a period of years to work with clergy, seminarians, and can be lay ministers too. You don't have to be ordained to be in clinical pastoral education. To work with them to help them reflect on the work that they're doing. So it involves understanding how persons function. So you do some theoretical learning to do that. You have a psychological theory that you might work out of that kind of thing.
Right.
And also practical application and experience in ministry. So it's a multi-year process. Not unlike being ordained in a church tradition, denomination, that takes years to do that. And you go through a process of certification to become a supervisor.
And it takes quite a few years of being involved in yourself in CPE. So you're learning.
That's right.
It's the action reflection model, and you're learning how to become a supervisor of folks that are going through that process themselves.
Absolutely, and you do that under supervision. So it's learning
right.
any particular craft, like apprenticeship kind of thing.
Right.
So you have a supervisor yourself while you're being in training, and then you work with students.
Now, you were saying that there was that there's a particular psychological underpinning or framework that you use in order to do your CPE supervising. What makes your program special?
Well, in my particular program, I use what's called a family systems theory approach or model. And one of the ways to describe that would be to say that in order to understand how people function, you have to put them into context. You have to understand them within the context within which they live. And the basic context is family. If you were to understand a group of people like a congregation or a whole community or any organization where people come together for a purpose, it functions as what's called an emotional unit. There's a certain way of being in that body. And the best way to understand it is to just go and observe families. Families are different, but they do tend to function according to similar patterns. Some do it better, some do it less well. And when anxiety, when pressure mounts, when crisis happens, that's how you can see these patterns functioning in the family unit. Helping people to see that and to see how they're a part of it, I think actually reduces anxiety. Helps them to, helps them to get more control of self in the midst of these things. And that's what my CPE program attempts to do, to help ministers do that.
Now, if a person wanted to become involved in a CPE program or your CPE program, how would they do that?
Best way would be to contact the organization or contact me personally that promotes the program and supports it. Samaritan Counseling Center of the Niagara Frontier. I come all the way from the Buffalo area. Joe, when you were in my program, that was a number of years ago, I won't say how many, there you were, and you were a pastor in one of the suburbs, Orchard Park, which is just Snowbelt area.
It was.
South of Buffalo, and you were there, and I was running this program, and you were required to do it for ordination.
Well, so I really wasn't required to do it for ordination. I had already done a practicum, but it was a same basic thing where it was action reflection model and all that. And then when I got into the church that I was serving, I realized I needed some more of that in order for me to really function. And I wasn't required by the church or by anybody to do it. I came in free will, so there you go. And I found a lot of meaning out of it that way.
And that's the best. You are Exhibit A, actually. Why? Because this program is not just for those who need it for an ordination process. It's for any pastor, lay minister, a church leader working in a congregation with a sufficient number of hours to learn about how they function in that setting in a small group process of peers with a supervisor.
Right.
And that's an accredited CPE program.
And what would your website be?
The website is www.cpewny, which stands for Western New York.org.
Okay.
But I take this program on the road. That's why I'm here in Binghamton.
Well, yeah, and we're not the only place where you've done it on the road, is it?
No, that's right. While the agency, Samaritan Counseling Center, is located in Buffalo, and that's my home area, I run programs in Rochester, which is fairly close, here in Binghamton, and then occasionally in western Pennsylvania, the Erie, Pennsylvania area, Meadville area, that northwestern PA.
It's about an hour away from here. It's not that...
Well, yeah, a little bit further.
Oh, yeah. Erie. I'm sorry. Erie's all the way on the other side of Pennsylvania.
So I enjoy traveling.
It's a good long way, even from Buffalo. It's like an hour drive or 2 hour drive. Yeah.
And what we do is we concentrate the learning in the group over a day or two period of time. And when I travel, as I do to Binghamton, it's 2 days every other week over a 4 to 5 month period of time. And through that time period, we get to do theory work. We look at case studies that people bring in and have a chance to just talk together about ministry. People get to know each other quite well.
Now, it's interesting to me that the work that you do is from I know that the theoretical underpinnings of it come from a Rabbi Edwin Freedman, who wrote the book Generation to Generation.
That's
It was a really good book. And it's interesting to me that congregational emotional process is not something that's that's unique just to churches.
Absolutely.
It's something that kind of that all groups kind of go through.
Right.
And what is it that that Freedman would say about an individual if they were, in a family system, or if they were at work, or what would he say about that person?
I think probably Ed Freedman would want to help that person look at how they function within the body. Mm-hmm. And functioning one's behavior would take many forms. There are some people who, to use the phrase, over-function. They absorb too much of the work and they get
Right.
burned out.
So
other people might underfunction in a reciprocal way, so it takes two to be in that. And they might not do their work very well, and others might cover for them. That's how a system tends to work when it's anxious.
So over-functioning would be the person who takes too much responsibility for someone else. So, like the
Yes.
typical example might be an under-functioning child with an over-functioning parent.
Absolutely, that's right.
So the parent then tries to organize for that child or do all kinds of stuff for that child that they wouldn't otherwise
Right.
be able to, that the child doesn't want to do for themselves. They just
Right.
take their hands off and go.
And I mean, it's a paradoxical thing, and it says theological ramifications. You just look at and human implications. People try to get out of problems,
Mm-hmm.
but oftentimes in trying to get out of problems, they actually reinforce them.
Mm-hmm.
That is a powerful. If a person can get a hold of that awareness, they can begin to see a way to change. That's an amazing thing. And in our, I think, Christian theology, we say the awareness of one's frailty, or we use the term human sin, is actually the beginning of the awareness of God's grace. I think there's a parallel there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's
Yeah. Well, and then God has to take his hands off at times and go, whoa, I'm over-functioning here.
That's right.
I'm going to leave it up to you.
Yeah, Jesus didn't stay here forever in
Right.
the Christian tradition.
Right.
He went back to the Father.
Right.
And said, okay, church, it's time for you to do the work. Oh yeah, the Holy Spirit's with you.
Yeah.
And I think this is true in many Christian and many religious traditions as well.
It's interesting to me that when Paul talks about the marriage relationship between a husband and wife,
Right.
he makes the analogy, this is the relationship between Christ and the church.
Right.
So in certain ways, yeah, and it happens a lot in marriage. You can see, an over-functioning spouse in relationship to their
Right.
to the husband or the wife, and they end up trying to fix that person, or
That's
they
right.
try to just over-function in that relationship, and the other person is just seen as being a lump or whatever.
That's right. And if the way out of that, now it's easy to say, it's harder to do. The way out of that is instead of one person, the person who's trying to change the other, focusing on the one he or she is trying to change, if you could focus on yourself and how you contribute to the problem,
Right.
that's the beginning of change. So it's really a focus on one's part